Dive back into the neon pulse of a world where every heartbeat is a countdown to the next big revelation. We capture the rhythm of the city and the soul of the survivor in high definition. Hit subscribe now and keep your finger on the pulse of storytelling.
She's been unstable for years. This company is better off without her. We're doing her a favor, honestly. My father's voice came through my earbuds, clear as a bell. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, 3 floors below the building. I had helped build from a 12-person startup into a $40 million operation. The timestamp on the recording read 11:47 p.m. He didn't know I had remotely accessed the boardroom's audio system. He didn't know I had been listening for 6 minutes. He didn't know I was holding a USB drive with 3 years of financial records that would end his career. I took a sip of cold coffee and kept listening. My brother laughed at something my father said. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew that laugh. I had grown up with it. It was the laugh he used when he thought he was winning. They had no idea the game had already changed. I didn't move the car. I just sat there in the dark, watching the elevator numbers on the wall panel count up and down, and I let myself feel it, the weight of everything I was about to do. Then I set down the coffee, opened the laptop, and pulled up the server access dashboard. It was time. I have to explain something about my family before any of this makes sense. We are not a family in the way most people use that word. We are a business arrangement with shared DNA. My grandfather built Callaway Interiors from nothing, a regional furniture and design firm that grew, slowly and stubbornly, into something real over 50 years. When he died, he left the majority stake to my father. Equal operational roles to my father and me. That was the plan. That was in writing. I am 31 years old. I have an MBA from Michigan, and a decade of nights and weekends poured into a company that still has my grandfather's handwriting on the original lease agreement, framed above the front desk on the 14th floor. I negotiated our 3 largest contracts. I restructured our supply chain when costs were bleeding us dry. I brought in the software platform that automated our client onboarding and saved us roughly $400,000 in the first year alone. My brother, who is 38 and has never once been to a client meeting sober, is listed as VP of Strategic Development. His primary strategy, as far as I can tell, has been to develop a relationship with the company credit card and expense it aggressively. But none of that is why I was sitting in a parking garage at midnight with a USB drive. The reason was simpler than all of that. 8 months ago, I found out they had been quietly, methodically cutting me out. It started with a routine audit I ran on our vendor contracts. Something I did every quarter as a matter of habit. I noticed a payment routing discrepancy, small enough to miss if you weren't looking. A commission structure that had been modified without board approval, funneling override payments to a shell LLC. The LLC had been registered in Delaware 6 months earlier. The registered agent was my brother's college roommate. I didn't say anything. I kept looking. What I found over the next 3 months made me physically sick. They had reclassified my operational role on paper without informing me. A board resolution, dated 14 months prior, reduced my voting shares under a clause buried in the operating agreement. A clause that had been rewritten. I had signed the original. I had not signed the revision. The signature on the amended document was mine. It was not mine. I am a forensic accounting consultant on the side. I have done contract work for 2 law firms and a federal task force. I know what document fraud looks like. I know what it smells like. I can tell the difference between a scan and an original, between a date that was typed and a date that was added later in a slightly different font weight. The signature on that document was not mine. The notary stamp was real. Somebody had paid for a real notary on a forged signature. That costs more than a fake stamp. It means they planned it. I kept looking. The deeper I went, the worse it got. My profit-sharing disbursements for the last 2 fiscal years had been redirected, not stolen outright. They were rerouted into a holding account under my name that I did not control, then reclassified as a loan repayment. I had never taken a loan from the company. There was a loan agreement in the files. I had allegedly borrowed $620,000, used as a down payment on my condo. I paid for my condo with money I had saved for 11 years, and a mortgage I qualified for on my own. I have every document. The loan agreement was fiction. The interest payments had been quietly deducted from my salary for 16 months. I sat with that number for a long time. $620,000. People ask me sometimes why I didn't confront them immediately, why I didn't call a lawyer the moment I found the first discrepancy. I have thought about how to explain it. The best I can do is this. When you find out your family has been stealing from you, the first thing you feel is not anger. It is grief. It is the specific grief of realizing that something you thought was solid was never solid at all. You go back through every memory, and you look at it differently. Every holiday dinner. Every time my father put his hand on my shoulder and said he was proud of me. Every time my brother called me his little sister, like it was a term of endearment instead of a reminder of the hierarchy. I grieved for about 3 weeks. I cried in my car twice, which I will admit to because it is true, and because pretending it didn't happen would be dishonest. Then I stopped grieving and I started building a case. The moment that finished it for me, the moment the grief burned off and left something cleaner behind, was a Tuesday in February. I had just gotten out of a meeting where my father announced, in front of the entire senior leadership team, that my brother would be taking over as co-CEO. Effective immediately. He framed it as an expansion of leadership. He used the phrase, streamlining decision-making authority. He did not look at me once during the entire announcement. I drove home, I made dinner. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop, and started typing a list of every piece of evidence I had in chronological order, with document references. I typed for 4 hours. When I was done, I printed it out and I held it in both hands and I thought, they think I am going to cry and disappear. They do not know what I do. The plan took 5 months to execute. I want to be precise about the sequence because the order mattered. First, I secured independent legal counsel, an attorney who specialized in business litigation and had no connection to any firm my family had ever used. I handed her everything I had over 3 separate meetings. She told me, after the 3rd meeting, that she had rarely seen documentation this thorough outside of a federal case. That was the first time I felt something close to satisfaction. Second, I quietly had the forensic signature analysis done by an independent lab. The report came back confirming what I already knew. The signature on the amended operating agreement was a traced forgery. The ink pressure pattern was inconsistent with natural hand movement. The baseline drift was wrong. It was good work, but not good enough. Third, I started building what my attorney called the exit trap. This was the part that required patience. The company's annual shareholder meeting was scheduled for the last Thursday in July. That meeting, per the original operating agreement, the real one, not the revision, required my signature for any structural changes to ownership or executive authority to be ratified. My father had been planning to use that meeting to formally transfer my remaining shares at a valuation we had agreed to. We had not agreed to anything. But there was a document in the files that said we had. I let them prepare for that meeting. I let my brother spend 3 weeks producing a slide deck for it. I let my father schedule the company attorney, the outside accountants, and 3 board members to be present. I let them book the private dining room at the restaurant, on the 42nd floor of the building next to ours, because my father likes to do business where the view makes him feel important. I let them feel confident. 4 days before the meeting, I filed a complaint with the State Securities Division. The complaint included the forensic report, the financial analysis, the reclassified disbursements, the Shell LLC documentation, and a 22-page accounting of the loan agreement fraud. I did not tell anyone in my family that I had filed it. I also called a journalist at the regional business publication that had done a profile on our company 2 years earlier. Someone I trusted, someone who understood corporate structure, and I told her I might have something for her in about a week. 2 days before the meeting, I accessed the server. I want to be transparent about this part. I had legitimate administrative credentials for our company's document management system. I had maintained those credentials for 7 years. No one had revoked them, because no one had thought to. When you are systematically erased from a company, apparently the IT access review falls through the cracks. I did not alter any documents. I did not delete anything. What I did was compile a complete, time-stamped export of every file in the executive folder that had been modified in the last 3 years, along with the metadata showing who had accessed them and when. Then I exported the access logs. Then I saved everything to an encrypted backup that I sent to 3 separate locations: my attorney, a secure cloud archive, and a physical drive in a safe deposit box. Then I sent an email to every member of the board of directors. The email contained one attachment: a 12-page summary of the forensic findings, the securities filing reference number, and a calendar invitation for a call the following morning at 9 a.m. 7 of the 8 board members accepted the invitation. The 8th was my brother. I arrived at the restaurant on the night of the meeting, in a dress I had bought specifically for the occasion. Not because the occasion required it, but because my father once told me that I dressed too casually to be taken seriously as an executive. I wanted to be taken very seriously. My father was already at the table when I walked in. He had his reading glasses on, and a glass of scotch in front of him. The outside accountants were there, along with the company attorney, and 4 board members. My brother was standing by the window with his phone, his back to the room. My father looked up when I came in. He smiled, the way he always smiles when he thinks he has already won. "There she is," he said. "Right on time." "Always," I said. I sat down. I set my bag next to my chair. I took out a single folder and placed it flat on the table in front of me. My father glanced at it. "We have the full presentation ready," he said, nodding at my brother, who was now walking back toward the table. "This should be fairly straightforward tonight." "It will be," I said. The company attorney, who had been flipping through papers, looked up at me. He was a careful man, cautious by nature, and something in my tone made him pause. His eyes dropped to the folder and then came back to my face. My father started the meeting. He gave a brief overview of the agenda. The transfer of shares, the formalization of my brother's expanded role, the ratification of what he called previously agreed restructuring. He was smooth. He had always been smooth. That was the thing about him. He could make almost anything sound reasonable. When he finished, he looked at me. Any questions before we proceed? Actually, I said, I'd like to start with the operating agreement. I opened the folder. Inside was a side-by-side comparison. The original agreement with my signature, and the amended version with the forgery. Above both was the forensic lab report, with the conclusion paragraph highlighted. I placed it flat on the table and slid it toward the company attorney. Page 1, I said. The signature on the right is not mine. The lab confirmed it 4 weeks ago. There is a securities filing with the state referencing this document. The filing number is at the bottom of the page. The room went quiet. My brother said, "That's ridiculous." I looked at him for the first time since I sat down. Page 3, I said. The Shell LLC. It was registered 6 months before the first payment was routed through it. The registered agent is listed as your college roommate. The authorized signatory is your home address. I have the Delaware registration certificate. He opened his mouth. He closed it. My father set down his scotch glass. Very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. Page 7, I said, looking at the board members now. The loan agreement. I did not take a loan from this company. I have the mortgage documentation for my condo, the wire transfer records from my personal savings account, and a letter from my bank confirming the source of funds. The loan agreement in our files was created to justify 16 months of salary deductions. The total diverted is listed at the bottom. One of the board members, a woman who had known my grandfather, picked up the document and began reading. She did not put it down. Page 10, I said. The profit-sharing disbursements for fiscal years 22 and 23. The holding account they were rerouted into is not a company account. The account belongs to a trust. The trust was established by my father and my brother as co-trustees. I am listed as the beneficiary in name only. I have never had access to this account and was never informed it existed. My father looked at me across the table. There was something moving behind his eyes that I had never seen there before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the smooth, managed expression he usually wore. It was something quieter and smaller than that. Hannah. He started. My name, I said, is not on this agenda tonight in any capacity, except as a person whose shares are being transferred without her consent. I would like the record to reflect that I did not consent. I would also like the record to reflect that I filed a formal complaint with the State Securities Division on Monday, which means this meeting, and everything discussed in it, is now part of an active, regulatory review. The company attorney put down his pen. I'm going to need to pause this meeting, he said. That's fine, I said. I stood up. I picked up my folder. I have already sent the full documentation to each board member. You all have it. I also want you to know that there is a journalist from the business publication who is aware that this meeting was scheduled till tonight. I have not given her details. Whether she writes anything will depend entirely on how the regulatory process unfolds. I looked at my father one more time. He was still holding his scotch glass, though he hadn't drunk from it. You told a room full of people, I said, that I was unstable, that I was better off out of this company, that you were doing me a favor. I had not planned to say this part, but it came out steady, which surprised me. I found the recording. I want you to know that. My brother pushed back from the table. You can't just come in here and... I already did, I said. I walked out. The elevator was empty. I pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close, and I stood there holding my folder and I breathed, just breathed. The floors counted down. 42, 38, 20, lobby. The doors opened, and I walked through the marble entrance and out onto the street, and the night air hit me, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Just standing there, with the city moving around me the way it always does, indifferent and constant. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the board member who had been reading the document. A woman I had known since I was 12 years old, who had attended my college graduations and sent me a handwritten card when I made partner. I need you to know, she wrote, that none of us knew. I need you to know that. I believed her. I also knew that believing her didn't undo any of it. But it was something. I put my phone in my bag and walked to my car. The next 3 months were not quiet. A regulatory investigation is not a quick thing, and it is not a clean thing. There were depositions. There were document requests. There were 2 separate meetings with state investigators, where I sat across a conference table and walked through every piece of evidence, line by line, while someone took notes and another person recorded the room. My father hired a defense attorney within 48 hours of the board meeting. My brother hired a different one. They were no longer coordinating, which my attorney told me was a good sign. The Shell LLC was dissolved 6 weeks after the filing. The forensic report on the signature was admitted into the formal record. The board voted, at an emergency session, to freeze all executive actions pending the regulatory review. My brother was placed on administrative leave. My father took what the official press release called a voluntary step back from operational responsibilities, which is the corporate equivalent of being asked to leave a restaurant. The business publication ran a story. I had asked the journalist to hold until the regulatory process was formally opened, and she had. The story was measured and factual, which is all I had wanted. It named the Shell LLC. It referenced the securities filing. It quoted with my permission 2 sentences from the forensic report. My father called me 3 days after the story ran. It was the first time he had called me directly since the board meeting. I let it go to voicemail. He said he wanted to talk. He said the family didn't have to go through this publicly. He said he missed me. I listened to the voicemail once. I did not call back. What I want to say about my father, what I need to say, because leaving it out would make this story less true, is that he is not a cartoon. He is not a movie villain. He is a man who spent 40 years believing that the things he wanted were the same as the things that were right, and he never had anyone in his life who made him question that, and so he simply never did. That doesn't excuse what he did. I am very clear on that, but it is the true explanation, and I think it matters more than a simpler one. My mother called 2 weeks later. She had not been at the board meeting. She is not involved in the company. What she said when I finally picked up was this: I knew something was wrong. I didn't ask. She started crying before she finished the sentence. I did not cry, but I stayed on the phone with her for an hour. That was harder than any of it, if I'm being honest. The regulatory process concluded 7 months after I filed. My father settled without admission of wrongdoing, which his attorney told him was the best outcome available, and which my attorney told me was the best outcome I was going to get without a criminal referral, which the investigators had declined to pursue. He repaid the full amount of the diverted disbursements plus interest. He surrendered his operational role permanently. His shares were restructured. My brother's settlement was separate and took longer. The Shell LLC fraud resulted in a repayment agreement and a formal bar from serving as an executive officer at any company in the state for 5 years. His attorney released a statement. My brother did not. The company is still standing. That matters to me. It was my grandfather's company. People work there. I did not want to burn it down. I wanted it fixed. I was reinstated to my full operational role, with the corrected share structures, 8 months after the board meeting. My first act was to commission an independent audit of every vendor contract active in the last 4 years. My second act was to send a handwritten thank you note to the board member who had texted me that night in the lobby. My third act was to frame the original operating agreement, the real one, with my actual signature, and hang it next to my grandfather's handwriting above the front desk. I do not keep the forensic report anywhere visible. It lives in the filing cabinet in my office, in a folder labeled with the case number and the date. I know exactly where it is. I hope I never need to open it again. Some nights I drive past the parking garage, and I think about sitting there in the dark with cold coffee and an earpiece and a USB drive, listening to my father say I was better off gone. I think about how certain he sounded. I pour myself a glass of wine and I go back to work.